We were not allowed to say the words climate change. It was viewed as a political term. In fact, the first
Mm.
time that we dealt with the term climate change was in 2015, and that was the first time that a professional sports commissioner used the words climate change.
We're talking about the effect of the World Cup because, according to a report that we read, that this will be the most polluting tournament in history. You were inside the locker rooms, you were inside the boardrooms, you were working directly with commissioners. I remember seeing that you work with board at the Major League Baseball, also with the late David Stern at the NBA, who, according to the report I saw, took you by the shoulders and said, whatever you need, let me know.
Yes, I was the person who created the environmental program for Major League Baseball, for the National Hockey League, for the NBA, for the
Yeah.
U.S. Tennis Association. I created those environmental programs 20 years ago, actually between 2004 and 2009.
Oh, wow.
My responsibility is to tell the truth. Emissions continue to rise. Greenhouse gas emissions right now continue to rise in every sector: aviation, steel, cement, transportation, plastics, textiles, agriculture. Emissions are still going up. Right now, we're the atmosphere like a sewer. Every day, we're pumping over 120 million tons of global warming pollution into the atmosphere every day. And tomorrow we will pump even more. There is no big answer to the climate crisis. There's not one big thing that we could do to solve the problem. It's not India. It's not China. It's not the United States. The situation we're in is the result of literally hundreds of millions of environmentally ignorant decisions that have been made over centuries, over the last 150 or 200 years. Hundreds of millions of environmentally stupid decisions. We now need hundreds of millions of environmentally intelligent decisions. And there is no one big thing. I worked for over half a year just changing the plastic straws for the Super Bowl.
For over 40 years, how did your scientific training inform the way you approach sustainability in the sports industry and in the entertainment industry?
The 2015 Global Alliance Summit in Chicago, where you delivered a president's speech, and Wendy, who is a board member, introduced you and she called you a demigod and a man of passion. And I think listening to you now, I think that description fits you perfectly.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of the Sustainability and Climate Podcast. As always, I am your host, Labake, and I have the ever joyful Toby. Hi, Toby. How are you?
Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of the podcast. How have you been, Labake?
I've been good. Good. I feel like time is moving really quickly. We're already well into March, and it's starting to scare me a little bit. I'm getting to that point in the year where I'm like, okay, Q1 is nearing the end. We're kind of getting into, we're well into the year now. You can't be rewriting your 2026 goals every day. But no, I'm good.
Awesome.
I'm trying to maintain positivity amid the existential crisis we're going through as a world. But
nice.
Other than that, I'm good. How about you?
Is needed. I'm good. I'm all right. Busy couple of days, but as always, everything fresh, everything nice.
Yes, Toby is always busy, guys. Toby does a million and one things. If only you knew.
We're just doing what we know we can do best.
As you should. Okay. Today we have a very exciting guest, but before that, I wanted to jump into the news. I don't know if our look today is giving a little bit of a hint.
Yeah.
Let us know how quickly you can guess, if anything, what industry our guest is in. So we had a couple of news items today that we wanted to kind of quickly talk through. The first one for me is very interesting, actually. The Dutch Football League, which also houses the Bundesliga. Did I say that correctly?
Bundesliga.
I wasn't even close. That one, basically, they have integrated sustainability criteria into their licensing system over the past year plus. And for this new season, so for the 2025-2026 season, they raised the bar even more. They're requiring clubs to provide independent third-party verification of compliance with sustainability requirements. This includes things like centralized data collection on emissions, energy use, water consumption, waste management, across all 36 clubs. And I think that's so interesting because when you think about football, when you think about the leagues like say it again,
Bundesliga.
that one. When you think about when you think about that, you don't sustainability for a lot of people is in front of mind,
Yeah.
right? And so seeing them take such an active, such a proactive and responsible, if you will, position towards compelling the clubs playing in there, making it part of the licensing requirement. I think that's incredible. I saw that and I was very impressed. So
Oh, that's
that's what
good.
I wanted to lead with.
Oh, awesome. And friend of mine is also within that same line. Because again, like Lavake mentioned, if you have an idea with the way we address for today's episode, you know what we're talking about. And I saw a report that says that the World Economic Forum, they did like a collaboration with a global management consultancy company where they released a report called Sport for People and Planet. Actually, it's the first comprehensive attempt for them to understand the true vulnerability of the global sport economy. And one thing he also mentioned in that report is that the global sports industry at the moment generate approximately $2.3 trillion in annual revenue, which is a lot. And but the important thing in that report is that climate change could actually wipe out up to $517 billion of annual sport revenue by 2030.
Oh,
And
wow.
if action is not taken, it could reach about 1.6 trillion by 2050. And to basically put that into perspective, the report is saying that the what do I call it? It will bring a huge threat to one of the world's fastest growing economic sector because the sporting industry is a sector on its own. And so it's asking for world leaders, football clubs, and everybody to see what they can do in order for it not to happen. And the report also delivers a very disturbing news that I saw because it said that by 2040, only 10 countries will have sufficient snow reliability towards the Winter World Cup, like the Winter Olympics, rather, which I believe it's not a good thing because at the moment, 21 locations have hosted the Winter Olympics since 1924, and only 4 would remain if nothing is not done by
Oh, wow.
2040. Yeah, that's a huge one, and the report ended by saying that climate risk management is no longer optional for the sporting industry, and at the
Mhm.
moment is asking for everyone to see it as a strategic obligation in order to protect the sport and in order to preserve the sport as well.
Interesting. So I think everybody can kind of guess now that, our guest is from the sporting industry.
Yeah.
And to that effect, one more piece of news that I found was interesting when I was looking at, the intersection of sustainability and sports. Thinking about sporting events and
Yeah.
tournaments, I think that's
Yeah.
one of the first things that people would think of when they think of sustainability and sports. And obviously, we've got the World Cup happening
Whoops.
in a few months this
In June,
summer.
yeah.
Yes, in June. And it is, so there's been quite a lot of conversation around it. And they're saying that this year's tournament, which will happen in the US, Mexico, and Canada, will be the first to be held across a continent, because usually it's
Wow.
in one place. It's the first held across a continent. It has 48 teams and would have 104 matches, which is 14 more than the previous one.
Yeah.
40 more matches. So basically, they're expanding. FIFA is also considering expanding the tournament to 64 teams from 48 for the 2030 edition,
Yeah.
right? Now, what this means essentially is that the expanded tournament will generate more emissions, right? So this World Cup in a few months, they've calculated the Scientists for Global Responsibility calculated an expanded that this expanded tournament would generate 9 million tons of carbon
Wow.
dioxide, making it the most climate damaging tournament in its history. It also would be one of the hottest with 14 out of the 16 host cities. 16 host cities is incredible. I expect it to be vulnerable to extreme heat during the tournament. And so it's really interesting when you think about global tournaments like this, like sports
Yeah.
that we all enjoy and we're all a part of, and how, the scale and the size of it also contributes to some of the sustainability targets that we're working towards. And so really thinking about the intersection of sustainability and sports and how we can change behavior. What are some of the things? Now, we're not saying cancel World Cups or cancel tournaments
Yeah.
or sports games, right? But what are some of the strategies that we can employ to make it that much more sustainable, that much more conscious and responsible, right? Does this apply in energy use, in waste management, in thinking about how we power the spaces that people are going to be a part of?
Yeah.
Even thinking about things like the heat that they mentioned, right? How do we make it more comfortable for the people that are going to be there? So providing kind of water bottles, reusable water bottles, for example. How do you create those systems and those practices within these tournaments that are not as damaging to the climate because it is, a once in a 4-year tournament? So I think, the intersection of sports and sustainability is a really, really interesting space.
Yeah.
And we've given away all the clues. So Toby's going to tell us a little bit about the guests that we have on today, and then we'll jump right into it.
Yeah, and for me, I think the important thing in this news is that the primary culprit is not the stadium construction or the full waste, right? It's the air travel alone, because air travel alone is estimated to account for about 7.7 million tons of emission. And that's a lot. And also, there's also issue with the sponsorship in terms of the sponsor. But again, we'll not mention names. But yeah, at the end of the day, you can't tell people not to come and have fun or enjoy the sporting activity. I just hope that I just wish rather that there'll be things in place to be able to either measure or to see how we can reduce, because 16 countries is a lot. And it's not that, for example, you play in one city, that's where you play all through the tournaments, right? You move from cities to cities, and again, carbon emission. But anyways, I try not to speak too much on football and competitions like this, but we just hope that FIFA and the regular bodies will do the right thing. So my question here is, because when I was going through this and trying to read more about you, what I find remarkable about your story is that you were not just advocating from the outside. You were inside the locker rooms, you were inside the boardrooms, you were working directly with commissioners. I remember seeing that you work with board at the Major League Baseball, also with the late David Stern at the NBA, who, according to the report I saw, took you by the shoulders and said, whatever you need, let me know, right? Yeah. What kind of access? And if you look at this access, it doesn't come easily, all right? And it doesn't come without resistance. Looking back now, what were the biggest barriers to getting the sports industry to take sustainability seriously? And how much has that resistance changed in 20 years?
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things I like to say is that unless you work in the building, you don't really know what's going on.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, in every story, I actually have worked with Hollywood. I created the environmental program for the Motion Picture Academy. I created the environmental program for the Recording Academy, for the Oscars and the Grammys. And
Grammys, yeah.
I worked with Disney and Warner. And what I learned from my interaction with Hollywood is that in every story, there's one person who makes a difference.
Yeah.
And in my work, there was one person who made a difference, and his name was Robert Redford. He was a very famous actor.
I loved him.
I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Yes.
But he's a very very famous actor, and he had a lot of credibility. And because he was the one who suggested that I work with baseball, there was actually, when he suggested it, we were at a meeting at his home, and another person at his home was a gentleman named Bob Fisher, and Bob Fisher's family owned the Oakland Athletics baseball team. And Bob Redford and Bob Fisher and I were having lunch. And Redford said, we have to get engaged with sports. And Bob Fisher said, Alan, if you write a letter to the commissioner of baseball, I will get it to him. So I wrote a letter to the commissioner of baseball saying that I'd like to meet with him to build on the good environmental work baseball was doing. I had absolutely no idea what environmental work baseball was doing, but I figured that somewhere they're recycling at least one can or one bottle. And I did not want to write a letter to the commissioner of baseball saying, I'd like to help you reduce your impacts. That would seem like, I would be presuming that he's doing bad things. And it turns out that the commissioner of baseball was a very substantial environmental committed person. And not even 2 weeks went by, and he invited me into his office. I got a call from the executive vice president of Major League Baseball, a gentleman named John McHale. He said, the commissioner would like to take a meeting with you. And I met with Bud Selig, and he said, I like what you're suggesting. At that time, there was no environmental program in any sports organization. I asked him, do you know how much energy is being consumed by baseball stadiums? He said he had no idea. I said, do you know how much water is being consumed by baseball games? He said he had no idea. Do you know how much waste is being produced by baseball stadiums? No idea. I said, well, why don't we just measure? Let's start with measuring. And that was a valuable way to begin because I wasn't asking him to change anything. And remember, sports is based on sponsorships and vendor relationships.
Yeah.
So if you're asking a baseball venue to change its operations, you're asking them to change their vendor. And guess what? These vendors are their friends. They go to the games together. They play golf together.
Yeah.
So if you're asking them to change their operations, you're not only asking them to change their venues, you're asking them to change their friends.
Friendship. Yeah.
Okay. So again, this gets into you have to have an emotional intelligence. You have to be strategic. It's not about me. Yeah. I know the science, I know the facts, but you have to design for the learner. You have to design your approach for the person or organization you're trying to influence. Right now, for example, and this is very, very complicated. I'll give you an extreme example. I work with the NBA all over the world. Okay. I oversee sustainability for the NBA globally. Okay. And guess what? We are working with over 26 different divisions at the NBA globally.
Wow.
Okay. They have games in Abu Dhabi. They have games in Paris. They have games in Berlin. They have games in London. Okay, they have operations all over the world. There's the Basketball Africa League. There's actually NBA in South America. Okay, and there's legal relationships. There's vendor relationships. There's sponsor relationships. And each venue, remember that, like, for example, with the NBA, let's just say the NBA does not own the venues.
Yeah.
Okay. Many teams own the venues, but in many cases, not even the teams own the venues. And of course, you have situations where the NBA venue is being shared by a circus or by the National Hockey League or by music concerts. Okay. So these are separate corporations. All of these venues are separate corporations, and they have their own ecosystem of business relationships. And unless you pay attention to that reality, you're not going to make any progress in changing the kind of energy that they use, or changing the way they manage their wastes, or changing what they're communicating to their fans and their attendees. Okay, so you could understand that this is extraordinarily complicated work. Okay, the good news is that every commissioner, and I know every one of them, supports this climate action.
Also,
okay? Every one of them, and if you want to influence an organization, the number one criteria of success from a sustainability perspective is support from leadership. That's the number one criteria. If you have support from leadership, then the resources can get released, and it is a message to the middle management people. I work with senior people, but I also work with middle management people. In fact, next week I'll be in Pittsburgh because I'm advising the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball team. We just completed an energy efficiency audit, which took over 2 years.
wow.
Yeah, I mean, the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball stadium was built in 2009, and it had never done an energy efficiency audit. Okay. So getting the ownership and the senior management to commit to an energy efficiency audit, the first thing was, the good news is that I'm friends with the owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates, Bob Nutting, and he actually is younger than me, and he's better looking than me, and and he is committed to this issue. And because I have the support of the owner, I now have the support of the president. And because I have the support of the president,
the
support of the vice presidents, and I have support of the middle management. And because of that, we were able to actually put out a request for proposals to get an energy efficiency audit done. And we just had an energy efficiency audit completed. The results are coming out tomorrow. As we speak. And then next week, I have 3 days of meetings in Pittsburgh to go over the results of the energy efficiency audit. But the point is just getting an efficiency audit, okay? I'm not talking about changing anything. I'm just talking about measuring. Took years to get done. Okay, and that could not have happened without the support of the leadership. The fact that Bud Selig, the commissioner of baseball, and Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL, and Billie Jean King, who invited me to work with the U.S. Tennis Association, and Don Garber at Major League Soccer, and I could name many, many individual team owners. The fact that I work with them, with the ownership and the commissioners, gives me, and again, because of Bob Redford's introduction, I got to meet the commissioner of baseball. And once I got to meet the commissioner of baseball, I was introduced to the commissioner of basketball.
Right.
And because the commissioner of basketball trusted the commissioner of baseball, so I was introduced to the commissioner of basketball. And guess what? 9 NBA venues were shared by the National Hockey League. So that when I met the commissioner of basketball, I was then introduced to the commissioner of hockey.
Okay.
Right. And then someone wrote an article in Sports Illustrated in 2007. We got a cover story about climate, about my work, and Billie Jean King read it. And I came to my office one day and there was a note on my desk. Alan, Billie Jean King would like to talk with you. Please call Pam at this number. Billie Jean King, for those who don't know, is a very famous tennis player.
Yeah.
Okay. And they just in 2007, they had just named the National Tennis Center in New York after Billie Jean King. They named it after her. And she saw the article, learned about my work with baseball, basketball, hockey, and soccer. And she said, they named the tennis center after me. Would you be willing to work with me to make sure that the U.S. Tennis Association was doing things in an environmentally intelligent way? And I said, of course.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So then I worked with Billie Jean King. And then, of course, that led then to the French Open in Roland Garros. And that led to Wimbledon. And that led to the Australian Open. And in fact, I just came back from a month in Australia at the Australian Open. So, this is all grown and it's based on relationships. And you have to know, I deal with a lot of environmental organizations. And, and they don't understand what I'm explaining to you right now, the challenges and the barriers for implementation. What they know is things are worsening and we need to change things. And they're right. But in order to actually make things change in reality, you have to deal with the business case. You have to deal with the cultural barriers. You have to deal with the economics. And this is why progress is slow. The market, science is telling us we need to do things by yesterday, but the market doesn't work that way. The market doesn't work that way.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, I love all of this because it also shows the snowball effect that comes from working in these spaces and how people get interested because they see the work that you're doing in kind of the other industries. But I'm really curious about, your background and how that translated with some of your work in entertainment and sports, right? So you're an environmental scientist and you mentioned for over 40 years. How did your scientific training inform the way you approach sustainability in the sports industry and in the entertainment industry?
Yeah. Well, obviously, doing industrial ecology, I understand what are the biggest impacts? Where should we focus? And obviously, the first thing we needed to do was focus on energy. Um, and also, I knew when I asked the commissioners, have you done efficiency audits? Have you looked at how much energy you're consuming and how much opportunity there is to reduce your energy cost? So I understood what the impacts are. I could look at species preservation. Well, that's not going to be an easy one to deal with. I looked at recycling. Yeah, that was one that we could deal with. But again, recycling is dependent on the ecological infrastructure of the host community. Okay. Many communities do not have an ecological infrastructure to deal with recycling. In the United States, for example, composting is very underdeveloped. So handling food waste or organic waste, there's only 184 composting facilities in the entire United States. And food waste and organic waste is one of the big greenhouse gas emitters. So by understanding the impacts of different industrial sectors, I was able to then target my approach to sports. And the first thing I said was, well, let's start with energy. Let's do energy efficiency audits and identify opportunities to reduce costs. Okay, if you could reduce costs, they will pay attention to you. If you could increase revenue, they'll pay even more attention to you. Okay, so that was the first thing: is how can I overlay my understanding of the industrial impacts, agriculture, energy, transportation, textiles, plastics, forestry. Which sector should I choose? I chose energy. And I also needed to take account of the politics because 20 years ago, we were not allowed to say the words climate change. Okay. We were not allowed to say the words climate change. It was viewed as a political term. In fact, the first time that we dealt with the term climate change was in 2015 when I worked on the sustainability report for the National Hockey League. That was the first professional sports league sustainability report. There's the cover. On page 2 is a letter from the commissioner. On page 3 is a letter from me. And that was the first time that a professional sports commissioner used the words climate change. And the first time climate change was used in a venue was in 2017 by the NBA. We could not use the words climate change because it was viewed as political. So we had to talk about energy efficiency. And we had to talk about making the operations more efficient. Again, the question is, how can we be effective? Okay, it's not what I want. And it's just science, it's culture, it's economics, it's business. Okay. And look, the good news is that climate issues have gone from a good to have, from being the right thing to do, to now being an essential management obligation. Because increasingly, regulations exist. So one of the benefits of working with the NBA globally is that Europe has strong climate laws.
Yeah.
Okay. I just came back from a month in Australia. I go there every year for the Australian Open. I work with them, but also my son and his husband live there. And Australia has a very demanding climate reporting law. And of course, the Paris Accord and Europe and France and the UK, the EU has strong climate reporting laws and greenhouse gas reduction requirements. So that helps. When there's a law, that helps. Like in New York City, I work with the Yankees. The benefit of working in New York City is New York City has the most stringent environmental laws in the United States. Okay. New York City and New York State require measurement of greenhouse gases, require by law reduction of greenhouse gases. So it's no longer a good to have, it's a must have. So now when I go to the chief financial officer, I'm not just asking him for something because it's the right thing to do. I'm asking him for something because it's legally required to do. And if there's one thing sports organizations know how to do, it's follow the rules. Okay. And I cannot tell you how many times sports operations people say, Alan, can you get us a law? Can you get us a law? Get
Mm,
us a law. We know how to follow the rules. We know how to follow the laws. Okay.
right.
Otherwise, it's just a good to have and not a must have.
Yeah. See, so it's good to have these laws and the strategy. And my biggest concern is now translating it to the mass audience because I remember you saying that there's not a science section every day, there's a sports section every day. And it's because people get to read these magazines, they get to know more about it. But in 2026, for example, what does meaningful climate conversation to a mass audience actually look like? Because we see how sport organizations, how athletes, how entertainers, and other people talk about it. But how do we get this information to the mass audience? Because I believe that is where the shifts actually happen and at a bigger scale.
You're absolutely right. Look, the most important thing is is to get people to vote for politicians that pay attention to climate. Okay,
Okay.
so let's put that aside. Okay. But that's a question of climate literacy. Um, what I like to emphasize is there is no big answer to the climate crisis. There's not one big thing that we could do to solve the problem. It's not India. It's not China. It's not the United States. The situation we're in is the result of literally hundreds of millions of environmentally ignorant decisions that have been made over centuries, over the last 150 or 200 years. Hundreds of millions of environmentally stupid decisions. We now need hundreds of millions of environmentally intelligent decisions. And there is no
Mm,
one big thing. I worked for over half a year just changing the plastic straws for the Super Bowl from from oil-based polypropylene straws to straws
mhm.
made that are made being made from the fermentation of canola oil. And that took over almost 9 months to
Oh,
change
wow.
just the straws.
Wow.
Okay. I work on straws. I mean, nothing, you have to have the courage to do small things. As
Mm,
Mother Teresa said, there are no great things, only small things with great love.
yeah.
Okay? And that's in everybody, there's no single answer. It's like there's literally over 1 billion plastic bags used every day. Okay. So if you say, oh, well, one more bag won't matter. Well, you're saying that, and so is 1 billion other people saying that. You see, so plastic bags matter, plastic straws matter, taking public transit matters, recycling matters, everything matters. And the challenge is that we don't see the benefits. You know, I have two sons. One is a veterinarian and one is a psychiatrist. And I envy them because my son, the veterinarian, they bring in him an animal and the animal leaves better. And my son, the psychiatrist, he talks to somebody, he gives them some medicine, and they feel better. Okay. They see the benefits of their work directly.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't. Okay. And in fact, in my world, everything is worse than when I started 40 years ago. Okay. Atmospheric pollution is worse. Deforestation is worse. The proliferation of toxics is worse. Ocean acidification is worse. Species extinction is worse. Everything is worsening. But when I get before my maker, she's not going to say, Alan, did you solve global warming? She's
Mm,
going
Mm,
to ask me, how did I spend my time?
yeah.
Okay. remember, and I could say, well, I work on this all the time. And remember, there are more slaves today than there were 100 years ago. Okay, we are still dealing with gender bias. We're still dealing with homophobia. We're still dealing with racism. Okay, these are issues that we have to continue to fight to improve forever. Okay, it's hard being a person. Okay, these things are a challenge that will never go away. Okay,
Yeah.
and I spend a good amount of my time now mentoring people your age and younger to continue the fight, to continue to have hope.
Yeah.
I have hope. Optimism is a whole different category. Okay. I know a little bit too much science to be optimistic.
Yeah.
But as a humanitarian, I will never give up my hope.
Mhm. I love that. There was a guest that we had on the podcast in the last season that spoke a lot about the difference between hope and optimism, particularly in the climate space. And I completely agree with that. So, kind of rounding off the conversation, where do you see some of the biggest untapped opportunities for sports organization in accelerating climate action? I think
Yeah.
sports is one of those unifying industries. A lot of people, different countries, different races, different genders, all would support or find common ground in their support for a particular team, a particular sport, whatever it is. So where are some of the untapped opportunities that some of these sports organizations can leverage to accelerate action?
Yeah, no, that's a critical question. Okay, first of all, the number one thing is they have to measure. Okay, they have to measure. Okay, you measure what matters. Okay, if you don't measure, you don't know what's going on. Okay, if you don't measure, you don't know how to make an improvement. If you don't measure, you don't know if you're making any improvement. So number one is to measure. Okay, the biggest opportunity is to shift the power supply to low carbon. Okay, right now in the United States, 84% of all the power comes from fossil fuels. Globally, over 80% of all the power in the world still comes from fossil fuels. Okay, so the most important thing for sports venues is to shift their power supplies to low carbon. And when I say low carbon, I'm not only talking about renewable like wind and solar, I'm also talking nuclear. Nuclear is a low carbon energy source. It's not a renewable energy source and it's not a clean energy source, but it is a low carbon energy source. Okay. So, for example, right now, every professional sports league in North America, the majority of power comes from fossil fuels.
Mhm.
Okay. Now it varies by league. Okay. In some cases, it's 60% coming from fossil fuels. In some cases, it's 55%. But in every case, more than half the power being used on average by professional sports venues in North America is coming from fossil fuels. Now, there are exceptions. There are some venues that get hydropower, depending on their location. Okay. But on average, most sports venues, on average, are still reliant on fossil fuels. So we need to get them to shift to low carbon sources. And that's called scope 2. There's 3 categories of greenhouse gas emissions that maybe you're familiar with. There's scope 1, which is what is happening at the venue, what the venue owns, like its ovens, its automobiles. There's scope 2, which is the power it's getting from its utility over the fence. Excuse me. And then there's scope 3, which is the energy, the impacts coming from all the suppliers. Okay. So, like, for example, with the French Open, 99% of all the greenhouse gases at Roland Garros French Open is scope 3 because they are powered by nuclear. Okay. And they have electric ovens, they have electric vehicles, they have electric ovens. So their scope 1 emissions are very low. Their scope 2 is very low because they're powered by nuclear, but their scope 3, which is everything else, That's the
Yeah.
that's 99% of their impacts.
Okay. Yeah, I think that goes well into the question I have in mind, because the World Cup is coming, right? And earlier we talked about where we're doing the news before you came on. We're talking about the effect of the World Cup, because according to a report that we read, that this will be the most polluting tournament in history. You see um, environmental organizations having concerns about the major sponsor for the World Cup, where six stadiums are going to face extreme heat stress. 5 million fans are expected. So my question is to you is, what must the OCTs, the governing bodies like FIFA and major event organizers do differently in order to align these mega events or mega competitions with the climate goals? And do you believe that 2026 can still be a turning point, or it's already a missed opportunity?
Look, it's very complicated. You see, I mean, FIFA is a good example. Um, right now they're planning to come to North America. Okay. And my friend oversaw FIFA's work in Australia and New Zealand for the Women's FIFA Cup. Um, FIFA does not own the venues.
Yeah.
Okay. FIFA is coming to North America for 2 months. Okay. Under the best of circumstances, I heard that there's one stadium that is hoping to have 7 FIFA games. Okay. And I think that's the most that any stadium will have, 7 games. The stadium is not going to change its operations for 7 games.
Mm.
Okay. FIFA does not control the stadium. Okay. So it's not like the Olympics where new facilities are built, like London
Yeah.
2012 or in Paris where they used existing facilities. Um, the Olympics, can have more influence over the ecological infrastructure that is used during its events. FIFA has very little influence over the ecological infrastructure of the venues that it uses. Okay. Um, and I know the people who run sustainability at FIFA, I know them very well. And they are frustrated. They are frustrated. They understand what needs to be done, but they also are at the mercy of the existing infrastructure. Remember, the problems we're dealing with are systemic. We have been relying on fossil fuels for 150 years. The production of plastics is continuing to increase. It's projected to increase 4 times by 2050, the production of plastics. By itself, plastics will consume 15% of the total carbon budget of the planet just to make plastics. Okay. And of course, we have a gigantic plastics pollution crisis. Okay. So, to your point about events, yes, I mean, with the NBA, we do look at the ecological attributes of the venues when we go to Abu Dhabi, when we go to Paris, when we go to Berlin, when we go to London. Um, we look at the ecological attributes of the venues that we choose to use, but it is only one small criteria. Remember, the number one criteria is security.
Yeah.
Make sure that the people are safe. Okay. I mean, I work at Yankee Stadium, and Yankee Stadium is a national security target. So the Yankees have to do things for security reasons that are not driven by ecological motivations, but because they have to keep 45,000 people safe 81 times a year. Okay.
Good
So,
job.
paying attention to security is critical. Making sure that the game goes on safely and that the players are safe. Okay. And last year, the NBA reduced um, airline miles traveled by teams by 44,000 miles. The NBA reduced miles traveled for its season by 44,000 miles. That was not done for climate reasons. That was done for player health. Now, it did have climate benefits, so we're happy about that. But the number one motivation was the players were not happy with the way that the schedule required them to travel. They were being physically burdened with the travel. Okay. Remember, the most valuable asset of a sports organization is the player. Okay. That's the number one most valuable asset. And you know what? The average professional life expectancy, professional career expectancy, not life expectancy, the professional of an NBA player is less than 5 years. It's actually something like 3 years. So they need to make a lifetime's worth of revenue in less than 5 years while they're at the NBA.
Wow.
And they're not going to get that by marketing solar panels. Okay. They're going to get that by marketing trucks and pizza and gambling. Okay. And that's how they have to, and they spend, their entire, school career and college career and cultivation to get into the NBA. And with very few exceptions, every one of them is out within 5 years.
Wow.
So to get players to pay attention to climate issues, you have to deal with the agents. I deal with player agents. Yeah. Okay. I deal with the players' agents. And let me tell you, some are helpful and some told me to go someplace. Okay. And it comes down to individual players. It's interesting.
Awesome. It's
very interesting when players from Europe come to work in the United States, because in Europe, they're used to recycling and they're used to, they come to the United States and there's no recycling and they like, what's going on here? And there's no public transit, so yeah, I mean, it's
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Welcome to my world. Welcome to my
No, this has really
For sure.
This has really been an enlightening conversation. I don't know if Lavake has any closing words before I say what I need to say before we wrap up.
No, I thought it was awesome. Yeah. No, please go on. Please do go on.
I would just say blessings, infinite blessings to you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share, this conversation with you. This is what we need to do. My work is actually on the ground at the venue implementation. I get asked to give speeches a lot. I don't do that a lot anymore because really my focus is on making changes on the ground, my focus is on how to actually change a particular technology, how to change a particular operation, how to change a particular product from an environmentally ignorant option to an environmentally intelligent option. So I focus on on the ground implementation. Yeah. And I do that, frankly, with more venues and organizations in sports than anyone in the world. I feel like I'm in a very privileged position. I take my work enormously seriously. I work with scientific formulas that estimate how many people will die from doing things wrong. And the way I look at those formulas is that when there's somebody who says, oh, well, this amount of people will die, I always assume it's going to be my children.
Wow.
And that's that's the seriousness that I take to my work. That any impact that I will allow to happen is going to affect my children. And guess what? There's a very good chance it will.
Well, thank you so much.
And I think that's an approach that we all need to take.
Yeah. And I think one thing we want to do, or we started doing in this season, is is to give people their flowers while they're alive. Because for you, Dr. Allen, you started your journey at the staff retreat where someone pointed toward the stadium and said, that is where America is. And I remember reading that most people in the room, they nodded and moved on, but you did not. You walked into those stadiums, you knocked those doors, you sat across from league commissioners and team owners, and people who had never once asked to think about recycling. You made them care. I remember watching the 2015 Global Alliance Summit in Chicago, where you delivered a president's speech, and Wendy, who is a board member, introduced you and she called you a demigod and a man of passion. And I think listening to you now, I think that description fits you perfectly, because your work, because of your refusal to stay comfortable, there are sustainability directors in every major league. And interestingly, we had a sustainability director from the Cleveland Cavaliers last season on the podcast. And there are also compost systems at stadiums that once never had none. There are athletes now who are speaking at climate conferences. There are commissioners who, on record, I saw like 3, they are committing to net zero. And I see that as your legacy, because every one of those moments, looking back at it, it traces back to you. And I remember you once saying that nothing is too small to matter. And I want to say it back to you now, to say that no person is too small to matter. So I would just to say thank you so much, Dr. Allen, for your contribution to the game, for your contribution to the planet. And I hope that future generations, when they read of your story, they'll be inspired to continue to take action. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, blessings to you. We have to help each other. You know,
Yeah.
there's nothing more satisfying than helping people. That, to me, that is happiness. You know, I mean, I am blessed. You know, my parents are refugees. You know, my parents were subject to horrible, horrible. My father's 2 sons were murdered
Wow.
because of his religion. My mother's daughter was murdered because of her
Wow.
religion. My mother's first husband was murdered because of his religion, and
Wow.
my father's first wife was murdered because of their religion. 22 people in my family were murdered
Wow.
because of their religion.
Wow.
Yeah. And I became committed to helping to alleviate intolerance and suffering. I did not become embittered. I became compassionate, and I'm an empath. I experience a lot of empathic distress. It's not
Wow.
easy. It's not easy to
Yeah.
know what we know. I do
Yeah.
cry. I do cry. I remember just a couple of years ago, I spent, I spent a month in India. And the first 4 days, I called my wife. I was crying, and I said, everything I've been doing for 40 years is useless.
Wow.
Wow.
I travel around the world. I go to China, I go to the Middle East, and, you see what's going on, and it's very, challenging. But,
Wow.
but I have a motto: don't despair. But
Mm.
but if you must despair, work on. Don't despair.
Mm.
But if you must despair, work on. And that's basically, that's the way it is. And I'm also blessed that people pay me money to do this. But I have to tell you that, but you know what? I only applied to one job in my life in 1982.
Wow.
I applied to a think tank to study a technology. That was the only time I ever applied for a job. And they actually said, we don't have the money to hire you, but if you help us raise the money to study that technology, you could do the research. So I donated 9 months of my time. I was finishing my PhD, and
Wow.
I got the money. And then I wrote a book about that technology, and I wrote another book about that technology. And because of those books and that technology, people started to ask me to help them. And that
Mm.
only job I ever applied for was to study that
Wow.
technology. And ever since then, people have asked me to help them. And so that's good.
Wow.
And yeah, and I've never done it because of the money.
Mm.
Money matters, But look, work is about money and meaning. And it's a lot easier to make money than it is to find meaningful work. And I do a lot of mentoring. And what I'm finding is most people these days want meaningful work, want to do meaningful things like what you're doing right now.
Mhm.